All right, you guys, most of the dust has settled from the 2025 NFL draft and undrafted free agency. And so it's time to take a look at the bigger picture and the roster and everything else moving ahead as we have rookie minicamp just around the corner and then full scale OTAs before kind of the lull hits before training camp arrives in July. But today, an annual tradition, my shadow draft, where when the Seahawks were on the clock at every pick throughout the draft, I scribbled down or made a note of who I would pick in that moment. It's a fun exercise. This was taught to me years ago from Keith Myers of the Seahawks Playbook podcast when we were both co-editors at 12th Man Rising. It's a fun exercise. It can sometimes be stressful and hard to keep up with, but today I'm going to share those results with you. And the cool thing is then we get to compare reality against alternate reality. And then you get to decide which one you like best. This is Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, you guys, welcome back. I am Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Please subscribe to the channel if you don't already. Hit that like button. And if you hit the bell underneath the screen here, you'll get notified anytime I post new content. I am a full-time content creator, and we are now entering into the dark days of the doldrums, slowest time of the year for content creators. So those are the best ways you can support the channel. Comment, engage, subscribe, and like. Any other more tangible way that you might wish to support the show, those links and all those instructions are down below in the description for you as well. All right, so let's get into this. This is fun. It seems like forever ago now that we had this draft, after it seemed like forever. The time was moving so slowly leading up to the draft, and now we get to wrap our heads around it. It was a lot of fun. We had some drama. We had some surprises. And, we talked a lot over the last couple of months about how it's always been difficult to try and predict what the Seahawks were going to do in the draft. For many years there, it was impossible because they just never seemed to adhere to any kind of consistent parameters that we could all sort of hold on to. The last few years have been a little bit easier to project because we've seen some trends. We talked about the shift in the way that they evaluate and draft since 2020. One of those is not as many shots taken on smaller school prospects. Also, not as many risks taken on players who haven't played a lot of football. And so those are some of the trends we've seen in the last couple of years. Big schools from big conferences, guys that have played a lot of football, which there have been more of, as we've talked about several times over the last few months because of the effects of still even some of the lingering COVID hangover, but NIL, those types of things, transfer portal that keeps these guys in school longer. So again, here's how this works. It's called a shadow draft, and you basically play GM along with the GM. And so whenever the Seahawks are on the clock, and I didn't do a good enough job promoting that this year. Next year I will. That's on me, my bad, because then you can do one as well and we could compare some of the fun shadow drafts. So I'll make a note of that to bring that up next year. Don't let me forget. All right. I'm putting it on you. And then off to the side, or I use iPhone notes. I just jot down who I would take in that moment, or who I think they'll take, right? Sometimes it's one or the other. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. But trying to be as Seahawky as we can, and then compare afterwards. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to go pick by pick. First of all, we'll go over the draft class real quickly again, and then I'll go pick by pick, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I was thinking at each of those picks. Now, this is a fluid situation, right? Because if early in the draft they pick a player. They pick a certain player, and then you pick your shadow choice. Well, then you get to the next pick, and if your shadow choice fills a need that they haven't addressed yet, then you're less likely to pick that need for them. Consequently, if they choose a different position group early in the draft, or at any point really, then it kind of alters that alternate timeline, right? And so you want to still try and come up with a balanced class. So you can't just make each pick in a vacuum. You still have to do it within the context of the full draft board. So, of course, in case you've been sleeping under a rock, this is the Seahawks final draft class. And if you haven't seen my full recap of it, definitely go back and do that. Gray Zabel, of course, Seahawks finally take an interior offensive lineman the first time since they took Steve Hutchinson under Mike Holmgren. What's notable about that, and there are so many threads now tying these two players together, not only was Steve Hutchinson involved in the evaluation and the selection of Gray Zabel because he is now working as a scout for the Seahawks and he specializes in evaluating offensive linemen. But also numbers were announced yesterday, and Gray Zabel is wearing number 76, which Steve Hutchinson, of course, wore when he was playing left guard. 2 decades ago. So Zabel in the first round, of course, they trade up for Nick Emenwari, the safety out of South Carolina. In the second round, Elijah Arroyo is the tight end out of Miami. I'm getting that name right finally. It's not Arroyo, it's Arroyo. And then the big shocker, kind of the high drama. This was a lot of fun to be live streaming this when it happened. Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama. Now, spoiler alert, that's where you're going to see my draft sharply differ with the Seahawks draft and where it kind of set it off on a different course. Riley Mills in the fourth round. Torrey Horton, the wide receiver out of Colorado State. In the fifth round, Robbie Oates, the fullback, converted tight end out of Alabama. Bryce Cabaldo, the tackle from Kansas, who they're going to give a shot at guard. Super, super athletic offensive lineman out of Kansas, a guy that we knew that they liked all through the process. And then the seventh round, and a lot of these picks, especially the first and the third one, Damian Martinez, the running back out of Miami, Ricky White, the wide receiver out of UNLV, they're showing up on a whole lot of steals of the draft and great value lists that you're seeing as everybody goes back now and breaks down the draft. And then Mason Richmond, the tackle out of Iowa, who initially they were reporting was going to be a guard, but then Mike McDonald and John Schneider have confirmed since then that they're going to give him a shot at tackle first. And I've been on the road all week, so I haven't had a chance to dig into his tape. I can't wait to watch him and get more familiar with him. And yeah, before we get to my names in the shadow draft, if you're wondering, where's the green screen? Where's the studio, right? I'm in a hotel in St. Louis, Missouri, one of many cities that I have been to for the very first time over the last 3 days. As my fiance and I are traveling almost coast to coast to our next stop. So we have a couple more days of driving. It has been an adventure. We can certainly say that. I mentioned on Twitter yesterday, born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and people bitch about the rain there. It's nothing. Yesterday, the entire 8 hours of driving was through some of the most torrential rain I have ever experienced in my life. So risked life and limb to get here for you today and still be able to provide some content. So this whole week wasn't just a blind spot. All right. So the fun part about a shadow draft is looking back and seeing if you got anything the same as the Seahawks did. And initially I did. So I wrote down Gray Zabel at 18. Now, if you're asking yourself, wait a minute, Dan, you didn't do a whole lot of mocks the last month or so with Gray Zabel as your first round pick. You're right. I was very consistent in who I mocked for the Seahawks in the first round, including in my final official predictive mock the Monday before the draft, Kenneth Grant. And I would have stuck with that if he was available on the clock. Even though, Zabel checked all the boxes, I think it was the smartest move in a big picture sense. I think it satiated the fan base. It also addressed the biggest need on the team, which Seahawks don't always do in the first round. So there's a lot of positive sentiment about this pick. But Kenneth Grant was not on the board at the time. And so there were some other guys that I considered. Thought about Donovan Ezeraku because he's a guy that just checks all the boxes when it comes to A-plus character. Also would have given them something off the edge that they don't currently have. Just really, really extreme burst and bend and quickness off the edge to go along with those long arms. But ended up, in the moment, going with Gray Zabel. In large part because of all the momentum in the few days prior to the draft from guys like Matt Miller, who said his sources were telling him for the Seahawks it's either Tetairoa McMillan or Gray Zabel. Well, McMillan went 8 to the Panthers, 9 to the Panthers. And Kenneth Grant went 13 to the Dolphins. That is higher than anyone was expecting him to go. And so that changed my approach. So I got one right, you guys. I got one right last year. I got Byron Murphy right on my predictive draft. This year I did not, but I got him right on the shadow draft, right? It was a 50-50 shot. Now the second round was pretty hectic because it happened so fast. If you recall, if you watched the live stream, Bill Alvstad of the Seahawks Playbook podcast, who he co-hosts coincidentally with, or not coincidentally, but just incidentally, I suppose, with Keith Myers, who was the inspiration for the shadow draft all those years ago. We were still talking about what we thought of the Gray Zabel pick when the Seahawks shot all the way up to number 35 and were quickly on the clock. And so I almost missed it. I almost missed the pick. And if you go back and watch the live stream, I think Bill and I almost immediately speculated that it would be Emenwari because it just made so much sense, right? He was routinely mocked often to the Seahawks in the first round. Seahawks fans galore love this guy. You know, the easy comps to Cam Chancellor and Kyle Hamilton, connections everywhere because of his size, weight, athletic traits. But I didn't go with Emenwari, and I think right off the bat, it was just because I have some reservations about him as a prospect. You know, I've talked about that throughout the process. Love the upside, and I had always said all along, even if they chose him at 18, I would quickly get on board because it means Mike McDonald believes in this guy. And when you see what he's done with Kyle Hamilton and some other guys in the past, I would have deferred to him and trusted him. But I was starting to get worried that we were on the verge of a wide receiver run in the second round, and I wasn't wrong. Unfortunately, the Seahawks got sniped, and this would have been an easy shadow draft pick for me, except Jaden Higgins went one pick before the tall, long, sort of Tetero McMillan light ex-receiver out of Iowa State. And so, not wanting to miss out on some of the better guys, I went with Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. Playmaker, yards after the catch, good route runner, explosive athlete, a guy that I never really attached to during the process because there were other guys I liked better, namely Higgins. Jack Besh I gave consideration to here as well. Savion Williams, I know a lot of fans liked him, and the Seahawks had him in for a 30 visit. I thought it was way too early for him. He was way too raw. So I just thought Harris would have been a nice complimentary pick and get that box checked, get that wide receiver out of the way in case there was another run between 35 and 50, because I had already had my eye on somebody that I knew I had to pick at 50 if he was still there or he would be gone. So the Seahawks, of course, take Elijah Arroyo at 50. I went with Oluwafemi Oladejo, the edge out of UCLA. If you've watched the show, you've heard me talk about him a bunch. You know, got to be familiar with him at the Senior Bowl. Converted from 3 years of stacked linebacker, off-ball linebacker at Cal and UCLA to edge in his final season at UCLA, and took to it like a fish to water. Has all the athletic traits you want from an edge. You know, just size, speed, power. Built like a Greek god, like he was made in a lab to be an edge player. But what put it over the top for me, this was a guy that I talked about it before the draft and put him on my no matter what list, right? My Vontae Mack no matter what list. Shout out to the movie Draft Day. Because of the character also. Like Seahawk through and through. They call him the mayor. Really articulate, really dynamic speaker. Players love him. Would have been a great guy in the locker room. Very reminiscent of how I felt about Derek Hall when I got to know him after he was drafted, because he wasn't a guy that I evaluated much in the process up until the draft 2 years ago. So Zabel, Harris, Oladejo were the picks so far. Interior offensive line, wide receiver, and edge, which was a need, and I really wanted to tap into that. However, by doing that, I missed out on some of the defensive tackles. And I was starting to get nervous here. TJ Sanders went. Alfred Collins, I loved as a young nose tackle projection, but I just thought that was too early for him. And I just didn't want to miss out on Oladejo. So I panicked a little bit when I got to 92 because the defensive tackles were flying off the board. And there was a guy sitting there that I knew the Seahawks liked, and I had heard they liked him a lot, maybe even more so than they were letting on. He was a standout at the Senior Bowl. They put a lot of weight on that. And he was a guy that was really versatile. He could play some nose, but he could also bounce around, play some 3 technique, mostly 5 technique, and even his, um, as some people have referred to, a 6 technique. Like he can play out wide. And that's Ty Robinson out of Nebraska. He was a 30 visit. He met with the Seahawks. We knew there was interest. The versatility was great. Talked about him a lot on the show. And so I thought I better get him now. I was hoping he'd be there. I was a little afraid he wouldn't. Little bit of an older prospect. There weren't as many of those this year, but he was one of them, 25-ish, I think. But I just wanted to get that out of the way. The Seahawks, of course, went Milroe there. And if you go back and you watch the stream, like I had jotted down Robinson, and we talked a lot about Robinson, Bill and I, leading up to that pick. But when it was Milroe, and we considered the possibility there, when he fell to 92, just instantly excited about it. How can you not be? And I'm really encouraged and pleased by the fact that the fan base seems to be fully on board with that pick. I think because of where it occurred, the value at 92. If they had taken him earlier, I think it would have been a little bit more polarizing. But they took him right where I think it was kind of perfect. So they trade out of the 4th round, but then they trade up in the 5th round, and it's got a little hectic with all of the trades, trying to keep up with all this. Of course, they took Riley Mills. So when they passed on 92, I think if Milroe had been gone, I might have nailed this one. They were clearly looking for that skill set, and there are some similarities between Riley Mills and Ty Robinson. They're both guys about the same height and weight, 6'5"-ish, 290, both athletic for their size, super high motor. They can move up and down the line. They can 4-point stance. They can stand up. So I think they wanted that kind of versatility and that kind of skill set. The tricky part is, and this is something we're going to have to talk about as we get into the next month or so and see if maybe there's some more acquisitions coming, is that Mills is coming off that ACL injury and might not be ready to go at the start of the season. That wasn't an option for Robinson. So the thinking was kind of similar, it appears. And I do wonder if they hadn't taken Milroe at 92, if Robinson would have been the pick over Mills. So in the 5th round, man, some things were starting to get picked clean, right? Like the corners, I looked there, didn't see anyone that I really liked. There weren't any other defensive tackles that made a lot of sense here. Just took one, right? So I went with Smile Mondon, inside linebacker, Georgia. A guy that Kirby Smart said was the best athlete he's ever coached. Undersized linebacker, saw him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he looked really dynamic, really moved well. He would have been more of a coverage linebacker. Like that's his specialty at this point in his development. And so I saw him as a fit as a 3rd linebacker, like a guy with a more athletic upside than Drake Thomas, taller, longer, a guy that can go sideline to sideline and cover players so that when McDonald does want to use 3 linebackers that he would fit there. So that was my pick. He ended up going at 161. So he went 19 picks later to the Eagles because, of course, the Eagles took another Georgia player to add to their defense. Also considered in that spot Marcus Bowe from Purdue, the tackle who's projected on the interior, might even project to center. So I thought he made some sense. They're super athletic, really would fit in that outside zone scheme. Thought about him and also thought about one of the tight ends because they were starting to go. And in my draft, I wouldn't have Arroyo, right? Sticking to my draft. That's another important point here. You don't react to what the Seahawks took. When they took Arroyo at 50, if you're doing your shadow draft, the way I do it anyway, maybe other people do it differently. I don't then go, okay, well, they have Arroyo, so now I don't need to worry about tight end. Otherwise, I'm not going to come out with a complete comprehensive draft class. So I gave some thought to Mitchell Evans, the tight end out of Notre Dame there before taking Mondon. And then at 166, I got a name that you're going to know because throughout the process, he got a lot of buzz. Rob Staten, shout out to him. He kind of got it all started. The uber athletic and perfect zone fit right tackle from UConn, who, of course, played side by side with Christian Haynes, the Seahawks' second-year right guard for a couple of years there. He's a guy they liked. He's a guy they had in for a visit. They were connected pretty heavily to him. That would have been my pick there. That was the pick in my shadow draft when we were on the clock. Of course, the Seahawks there took Torrey Horton because they waited on receiver, whereas I took Trey Harris in the 2nd round. Right now, I go back and I want to double dip on the offensive line and try and add something there. And I thought Lunt was a guy that was athletic enough that he could play the left side, so he could project long term. At worst, maybe his floor would have been, swing tackle. And but a guy, still had some work to do in pass protection, really improved in that area his final year at UConn. Phenomenal in the run game and really a fit for that zone scheme. So I thought, swing tackle, but also if they choose not to re-sign Abe Lucas after this year, a guy that maybe could take over the right tackle spot. So that's why that was my pick there. So now we get to a 175 in the fifth round. This is where the Seahawks took Robbie Oates. And I chuckled at this one because I was sort of thinking about fullback here. I had said in my hot take preview episode that I did with Josh and Mitch, the guys from 12 Talk, that I thought the Seahawks were going to double dip on defensive line and should double dip on defensive line. And while J.J. Pegues said Ole Miss is not a true nose tackle, he's actually more of a quick, get-off, penetrating, looks more like a 3 technique, but he plays at 320. So he's a guy that can move up and down the interior of the line there. And I thought just would have given them another depth piece, would really complement Ty Robinson well. And but also the fullback stuff. That's why I listed him there as defensive tackle fullback. When he did his pro day, they announced him as an offensive weapon. He played wildcat quarterback in short yardage and red zone and goal line situations at Ole Miss. He took direct handoffs. He was a converted tight end. He was recruited as a tight end before moving over to the defensive line. And so I thought he would have been a really intriguing player that would have basically filled 2 roster spots and given you a rotational defensive tackle who would be kind of fun to play with, while also being that big, huge fullback that could do some things for you down near the goal line on third and goal. So that was my thinking there. Then we get into the sixth round. Seahawks had 1 pick there after all the trades up and down. Bryce Cabeldue, who was a tackle at Kansas. They're going to try him at guard. I went with a tight end because now it was getting a little nerve-wracking. Wanted to get a tight end out of this class. It was a very deep class, but the top end talents were certainly gone. Gavin Bartholomew is a guy that I really he caught my eye at the Senior Bowl because he kind of reminded me of AJ Barner in a way. No elite traits, doesn't do anything great, but solid running routes, solid hands, functional blocker. Kind of like AJ Barner, no outstanding traits, but look at the rookie year he gave us, right? So I thought he was the best of the remaining tight ends, and I really wanted to take care of that need at that point. Then we get into the 7th round. We have these 3 picks, and this is where even John Schneider himself has said over the last couple of years that early in the draft we focus on best player available, although need is factored into their grade. And so the bigger the need, the more they might get pushed up the draft board a little bit. But late in the draft, he said full on, like we have to fill spots that we didn't fill. Although there were a couple of instances in the real life draft where they did not do that this year, right? No cornerbacks taken in the draft. But I did in a moment. But first, at 223, where the Seahawks took Damian Martinez, Sam Howell had been traded by now. And so I thought, okay, I want to take one of these young quarterbacks that slipped through the cracks, get him in there, see if he can develop him. Maybe he competes with Drew Lock. Maybe he doesn't. But now with Howell off the roster, someone that might be an upgrade over Jaron Hall. And I went with Curtis Rourke for a number of reasons, the quarterback out of Indiana. Love the frame, one of those rare 6'5", kind of bigger, sturdier quarterbacks, but had some functional movement skills. A lot of scouts and analysts felt like he would really fit in the Clint Kubiak system with some of those designed rollouts. He came onto my radar when Corbin Smith started talking about him early in the season for Indiana when they were off to their great start, and he was playing really well. Super quick release, good accuracy, good not great arm. Just seemed like kind of that prototypical poster child for a 7th round flyer on a quarterback. Coming off the ACL, we found out that he played the entire season last year for the Hoosiers on a torn ACL. That has Seahawks grit written all over it. And yet there was video of him shortly before the draft doing 7-step drops without a knee brace. And so it looked like the timeline was good, but also because of that injury, you traded Sam Howell, you could have kept Jaron Hall, and you could have redshirted Curtis Rourke, essentially, put him on injured reserve, put him on the VR machine, see if you can get something out of him in a year, right? So that was my thought process there. Then I had to take a corner because we needed to add somebody. And Kobe Bryant, I thought, was one of the really shocking fallers in the draft. I get it. Maybe the frame scares some people off, 175, 180 pounds. But his coverage skills are legitimate. His play style, his aggressiveness, his physicality belies his frame. And I think he might be up to 185 now. That's as much as Devin Witherspoon weighs, right? And he's made it work because he plays with that feisty, physical, tough demeanor. He showed it during practices at the Shrine game. Looked like a guy that maybe should have been at the Senior Bowl, might have belonged there. And just to catch up on a couple things, by the way, just to go back, sorry I missed this. Pegues, who I took in the 5th round, ended up going in the 6th round to the Raiders, Pete Carroll. Gavin Bartholomew ended up going about 10 picks later to the Vikings. And then Rourke, in this case, ends up going 4 picks later to the San Francisco 49ers, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. Obviously, I wasn't that far off. I was off by 4 picks, but also because that's the system, right? And so, sometimes I think I know what I don't know, and I think there's a lot that I don't know. Sometimes I catch myself knowing stuff, and there were a couple of moments in this shadow draft where I thought my thought process was good. And then with the final pick in the draft, the Seahawks, of course, went Ricky White. They double dip at receiver, Ricky White III out of UNLV. I wanted to get a running back for reasons that I mentioned leading up to the draft, because the Seahawks running back was deep and young, that it might have been tough to attract good undrafted free agent running backs because they're going to try to look for another roster that they might have a better chance of cracking. And so I took Donovan Edwards. This guy was kind of a favorite 7th round mock draft target of mine throughout the process. I don't understand why he's going so late. He had the 1,000-yard season as a sophomore at Michigan. He tore the Huskies apart in the national championship game with those 2 long touchdown runs. Jim Nagy at the Senior Bowl said he's such a good route runner and pass catcher that some teams have considered him as a pure slot receiver. He can make that transition, but he also has a good combination of size and speed, and played at a high level for a big school in a lot of big games. He ends up going undrafted. So did Kobe Bryant. He slips all the way through, signs with the Falcons as an undrafted free agent. Donovan Edwards got signed by the Jets in undrafted free agency. I think he has a good shot to make that team, and really couldn't understand why he lasted that long. So let's recap, shall we? This is my full shadow draft. Gray Zabel, of course, nailed that one after Kenneth Grant was off the board, because he would have been my pick there. Trey Harris, the receiver out of Ole Miss in the 2nd round. Femi Oladejo, the edge out of UCLA. Ty Robinson, the versatile kind of do-everything defensive lineman out of Nebraska. Smile Mondon, inside linebacker, Georgia. Chase Luntz, offensive tackle, UConn. J.J. Pegues, defensive tackle, fullback out of Ole Miss. In the 6th round, Gavin Bartholomew, tight end, Pitt. And then the 3 7th-round picks, Curtis Rourke, quarterback, Indiana. Kobe Bryant, corner, Kansas. And Donovan Edwards, running back, Michigan. Obviously I'm going to be biased, right? There are some things I like better about my draft. I like the combination of Ty Robinson, J.J. Pegues, and Femi Oladejo being added to that defensive line. It's been well documented. This was an offensive draft. Seahawks took 9 out of their 11 players on offense. And I understand why, and Schneider said it wasn't the intent, that it's just the way the board fell. But I would imagine there were a couple of times in there, especially on day 3, where maybe they had a couple of guys close on their board. One was offensive and one was defense. And maybe the deciding factor was, we have all 11 of our starters back. We have a couple other guys back who have started games. We're pretty deep on defense, and it's Mike McDonald's unit. We trust him and feel good about that unit being a capable defense early in the season, right out of the gate, giving us the opportunity to kind of get that offense with all these new players and a lot of youth, and yet again, a new scheme, new coaches, and trying to get this offensive line figured out. That let's just focus on that. And the defense is okay for now. We'll find some value in undrafted free agency. And they did. Talked about that on Monday. Check that out if you haven't already, with some of my favorite undrafted free agents from that class. And so I liked that. Whereas now there's some concern. right? I love Riley Mills. Absolutely love him. I was late to him in the evaluation process. Um, but there was a report earlier in the week that he was kind of rising up draft boards. That coaches around the league loved him, and that he was going to crack the top 100. He didn't quite. Seahawks got great value. He lasted until 142 because of the knee, and but we don't get to experience that right away. We didn't check that box. We didn't get any other defensive linemen in the draft, and so that coming out of it, the depth is a big concern. Now, Seahawks signed Jonathan Hankins. They're bringing him back again, another 1 year deal. I would imagine it's for about the same as last year. He played for $2 million last year. Coming off maybe the worst season of his career at the age of 32, the lowest PFF grade of his career. Not a lot of production. 1 sack, 30 tackles, 5 tackles for loss. He did play 35% of the snaps last year. But here's the thing, that role, and that so many of you have been clamoring for, and we've talked so much about on the show, it's a part-time role. It's a specialized role. It's early down run stuffing. It's 3rd and 1 goal line, and then it's early downs, and maybe just the first down because if you hold the other team to 1 yard and it's 2nd and 9, Hankins is coming off the field. So it wasn't as big of a need as some people I think are so anxious about, but it is one. And it was a disappointment for me to come out of this draft and not get 1 or 2 of those guys. And so I like what I did on the defensive line better. But by doing that, I cost myself the opportunity to take a shot at Jalen Milroe. And I think that we might look back a few years from now, and that might be the pick of this draft. That might be the story of this draft. It's worth a shot, even if he never develops into a starter. That skill set is so dynamic and unlimited, honestly, that you have to take a shot at it. And in the meantime, if you can figure out how to use him as a weapon, then all the better, right? It's not just a shot in the dark for the future. It's something that can help you win games, as I've predicted he will this year. I also went with 2 offensive linemen instead of 3. My goal all the way through the mock draft process was to get 3. I wanted to get another interior guy later in the draft that could play center or guard. Jackson Slater, our boy from Newport High School, right? He ends up going to the Tennessee Titans. Clay Webb was a target of mine. He went undrafted. I'm glad I didn't take him. I didn't know until after the draft. No one really did until it was reported that he has some very, very significant accusations off the field in the background that would have been really potentially messy. And so glad I didn't touch that. But Jonah Monheim, there were some other guys there kind of later in this draft. But I wanted to check some other boxes. I needed to get a tight end. Ended up getting Bartholomew later. Nowhere near the upside of Arroyo. I'm excited about that pick. I didn't get a safety, whereas the Seahawks got the first or second best safety in the class, depending on whose big board you look at. But I am more excited about Emin Worry than I would have been about an undrafted guy or just rolling with what we have, because he can be sort of a hybrid weapon as well. And I'm excited to see what McDonald does with him. And then I just get the 1 receiver. And while I really like Trey Harris, I'm not so sure. I'm actually, the more I sit with this, I might be more excited about Ricky White III than I am Torrey Horton. I think White has tremendous upside. And I think when you look at he and Harris physically, they're kind of similar in the way that they go about running routes and just playing the game. And so, I use that really high pick on Harris, whereas they get White in the 7th round and add Torrey Horton to it. The Seahawks obviously smashed me on that part of the draft. I favor the Seahawks draft for the most part. We both got Zabel right. I think the Emin Worry pick is kind of a no-brainer to hand to Mike McDonald, see what he can do with him. I think the Milroe pick is exciting as all get out, makes so much sense. It's something we haven't done around here in a long time in Seattle, right? And now we have a young quarterback that we can kind of get excited about and watch develop. I like Arroyo better than my tight end choice. I think the fullback situation, the more I study him and watch his limited production at Alabama with the ball in his hands, I'm excited about Oates. It just doesn't give you the defensive tackle versatility, obviously. And Cabell, I think, is just as good an athlete as Lunt, except he's probably going to play on the interior. I like Martinez better than Edwards. So, and like I said, I'm still going to study Richmond, got to get to know him. So overall, I think John Schneider did better than my shadow draft would have been. But let me ask you this. What do you think? which one do you like the best? Or which aspects of each one do you prefer? And I suppose we could take some time even and sort of meld the two together if we wanted to. Also, if any of you happen to do this, I would love for you to post your shadow draft down in the comments below. This was fun. Thanks, guys. I may not do another show until we are settled, and that's going to be Saturday or Sunday. And then I'll have a lot of catching up to do. I'll get back to daily content. As I said, this is a slower time of year, and so I'm going to just pump out the content as much as I can because, views per episode go way down. So I'm just going to try and give you as many choices and as much interesting content as I can for those of you who still want to stay engaged and watch content in the off season. And I'll lean pretty heavily during that time on some rankings, some historical stuff, some roster evaluations. I'll try to get as much information from the ground as I can with some of the reporters that cover the team after rookie minicamp and some of the OTA stuff. And then still continue. I've got some people on deck and some people lined up who are into analytics and draft analysis and just really try to dissect some of these undrafted signings and some of these draft picks and get some opinions on what these players might become. Thanks again, you guys. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Please subscribe to the channel if you want to support me in any other way. Those links are down below in the description. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks.